guys, I'm Miss Danica, and behind the camera is Miss Carrie. And since we can't have any field trips out today, we decided that we would take you out virtually. So what I have here is my dip net, and I've got a nice little pond behind me, and we're going to see if we can catch some frogs today. Let's go! Alright, I just dipped my net into this water. Let's see what I found. Oh, look! Look at this huge frog! This is a bullfrog. Take a look at that. It's got a lot of slime and muck on him, and for good reason, because I couldn't see him in the water. It's got a lot of this green and brown color, so it makes it really hard to see because he camouflages or blends in really well to the water. I think it's time we put him back. Now what I did with my net was I kind of dug it deep into the mud because that's where a lot of the fun stuff likes to hide. And looks like I found something fun right now. Here we go. Come over here and check this guy out. Wash him out of the mud a little bit. Now you're saying, what in the world is that thing? It kind of looks like a bee with no wings. What you're really looking at is a baby dragonfly. These dragonflies, when they hatch, there we go. When they hatch, they are in the water. And so they spend their life as young insects or larvae in the water until it's time for them to change. And then when they change, they'll come out of the water, and then they'll grow their wings and things like that, and then they'll take off as full adult dragonflies. So that is what a baby dragonfly looks like. See what else we can catch. And if you notice, every time I take my net out of the water and I got a bunch of gunk in there, when I'm done, I put that gunk right back where it came from so that the things that are in this water and that are using all of those things to live, I'm not taking that away. Oh. Found another cool thing. Found a couple, actually. Get them cleaned off a little bit so you guys can see them a little bit better. If you look really closely on this leaf, you'll see not one, but two little snails hanging out on that leaf. Pretty cool what we can find in the mud. Oh, here we go. See if they'll pop back up. I just put another little insect in here. Where did he go? There he is, right there, swimming around. Here he is, right there, right where my finger is. It's hard to keep track of because he's fast. See him zip through the water? Now, while we're looking and trying to find all these different things in the water, other than frogs, I do have a few sheets that we use to help us figure out, well, what kinds of things are we digging out of the water? Got two sheets here. One that looks like this. And one that looks like this. And this one actually has two sides, and the pictures are a little bit bigger so that we can see them a little easier. Now, that thing that was swimming around in the water that was kind of hard to see, that is called a back swimmer. Let's see what else we can find.
Show it to us on the...
Oh, that's a great idea, Miss Carrie. Let's see here. Oh, there he is on my paper, right there. So in case you couldn't get a good look at it in the water, you can kind of see using this picture and imagine what that little insect looks like.
So, Miss Danica, will you please tell us why you didn't hold that little insect in your hand?
Oh, that's a great question, Miss Carrie. There's a reason why I didn't hold it in my hand, and there's a reason why when I'm looking in my net, a lot of the times you'll see my hand on the outside part of the net. That's because sometimes some of those little things that we find and pull out of the water, they can sometimes bite us. So if I don't touch the insect and if I keep my hands on the outside of the net, I am totally safe and I don't have to worry about it.
But you put the dragonfly in your hand.
You're right, I did put the dragonfly in my hand because I know that dragonflies don't bite.
Good answers. Let's see what else we can find.
Let's see here. I'm going to move back a little bit. Oh, lots of mud and gunk in this one. Here's another big old snail. I think we'll put him back in the water where he belongs. This time I'm not seeing a whole lot, so we'll dump it back in. Alright guys, check what I just found in my net. There he is, right there. Can you see him? Does anybody know what that is? That is a crawdad. Alright, let's put him back in the water.
Really quickly, Miss Carrie had to move really fast. If you can, oh, you got two things going on in here. Can you get them right here against my hand? You've got a cricket frog right here. And this one, we got a little, maybe some sort of beetle. Right here, I just dove on my hand. Maybe a little diving type beetle. Okay. There's our cricket. And there he went. He took a leap. I know. You guys were missing my jokes, I know. Let me see what else I can find. Oh, I got another one. Danica? Miss Danica, you see who's sitting next to me? Without me catching him?
I do.
Can you get him?
Let's see if we can get a good shot.
Can you tell? Well, I'll tell everybody.
Oh, I see him. Can you see him, everybody?
That, my friends, is what we call a green frog.
Let's see if we can get a closer shot.
You know, it's possible it's a young bullfrog too. Look at that circle right behind the eyes. It's possible it could be a young bullfrog. But we also have green frogs here at Oakland Mills, and if you look at that one, usually green frogs, that circle behind their eye is called a tympanum, and usually on a green frog they're much brighter. But due to his size, I'm kind of still leaning toward green frog versus bullfrog, because that first one you pulled out was huge. That was in no doubt a bullfrog, but I'm thinking this one is a green frog.
You want to see if you can catch him, Miss Carrie?
All I have to say is they must still be a little cold. until they don't want to be caught. Thank you for jumping right back in there, sir. Stop. They're slippery for a reason.
Sometimes frog catching is harder than it looks.
Well, it's also my left hand, which isn't helping. And there he is. I don't know, that tympanum is kind of a little more obvious now that he's out of the water. I remember that camouflage that you were talking about earlier.
That's right.
But I believe he's a green frog.
I think he's ready to go.
And he's done. And there he goes. All right. Let's see if we can find something else. I'd like to find another stage of frog. We're finding lots of adults today. Yep, and there go those little cricket frogs. Notice I'm putting everything right back into the water, just like Miss Danica said. It doesn't look like we're having any luck. So how about we head to a different location?
All right, guys, I just dipped my net in and I found all kinds of good things. I got another little green frog. Check that guy out. And I think we'll put him back so we can see what else we found. Oh, look at this, guys. You see that little round blobby thing? That is a tadpole. When frogs are babies, this is what they look like. They hatch out of the egg. Now, of course, they are a lot smaller than this one once he comes out of the egg, and I think we'll actually put him in the water while I talk about him. We'll put him in our bucket. Because, and I actually have two in here, so we'll put another one in there. There's our other one. I think that's all I've got. Yep, just the two. Now, the reason I put them in the water is because as tadpoles, these guys have to stay in the water all the time. It's a little bit different than frogs. Frogs, they can stay in the water, but they can also come up on land. That's not true for tadpoles. Tadpoles have to stay in the water. They have to stay in the water because, well, that's what their bodies are made for. If you see, they've got a tail on the end that they can use for swimming, and they also only have gills to breathe. And if you're breathing with gills, that means that you have to stay in the water. Now, when that tadpole gets older, those gills are going to turn into lungs. And so because they have lungs, that lets them come out onto the land, and they don't always have to stay in the water. Now, frogs, when they go through their life cycle, they start out as eggs, and those eggs, because frogs belong to that group called amphibians, and amphibians are animals that have to stay in the water and for a little bit of their lives, and they can be on the land, and they've got that wet, slimy skin. But they also, when they lay their eggs, those eggs are kind of soft and squishy, and they kind of almost look like jelly, wouldn't you say, Miss Carrie?
Oh, definitely look like Jell-O with little black dots in it.
Right. And so those eggs, they're laid in the water, so when those babies come out, they're right where they need to be. Those babies come out and they look like this. They look like tadpoles, and then in fact they are tadpoles. And those tadpoles, as they grow, they're going to get a little bit bigger and bigger and bigger, and eventually they're going to start to grow some legs. And they might grow their back legs, and then they might grow their front legs. And then eventually they're going to absorb that tail that they have into their bodies, and so they won't have that tail anymore, and then by that time they'll be a full-on frog, an adult.
Well, Miss Danica, these tadpoles are really big. What kind of frog do you think they will turn into?
Well, because they're really big, Miss Carrie, my guess is that they will probably turn into that bullfrog that I caught earlier. Remember that really big one that I caught? Because these are really big, I think they'll probably turn into that really big frog. With tadpoles, sometimes it's really, really hard to tell until they become adults.
Well, then what's he going to eat? Especially if it's a bullfrog. What's it going to eat?
Well, here's the bad thing about bullfrogs. Bullfrogs eat pretty much everything, including other frogs. Miss Carrie, did you know that bullfrogs aren't even supposed to be here?
Actually, I did. They are not even native to Iowa, but we find them literally everywhere to the point where they've taken over. I'm not necessarily sure that that's a good thing.
Well, here's the thing. You're right. It's not a good thing. Here's why. Because bullfrogs eat everything, not only do they eat stuff that the frogs that are supposed to be here, the ones that are native, they eat that food, but they also eat the frogs, the ones that are, again, supposed to be here.
Well, as big as they are, I'm guessing that they were not born this year.
Definitely not.
So they're probably either a second year tadpole or maybe even third, because tadpoles don't always turn into that frog that first year. Sometimes they stay in this stage for a little while as they continue to grow. Oh, wait a minute. As they're growing and they're changing, what's that M word, everybody, that we learned? That M word is metamorphosis. Exactly. So as they're going through their life cycle and they're changing, sometimes some of them aren't eager to change and be an adult right away. Huh.
I don't blame them.
Not me either. So those are big tadpoles. Those are probably 2, maybe even 3-year tadpoles. And they might even be thinking about getting some legs here before too long.
One last good look at those tadpoles. Take a look at that guy. All right, I think it's time that we let them go.
Although when we were outside, we caught a lot of frogs, this time of year there are a lot of toads making a lot of noises too. And so how can we tell the difference between frogs and toads? Well, let's start with their similarities. I remember Danica mentioned that the frogs start their life off in the water in this jelly-like mass. Well, that's true for a frog, where it's just this like clump. If this was a toad, it would still be jelly-like, but they would be all spread out, kind of like a chain, similar to the chain that the bugs are hanging on up in the nature center. Still starting in the water. Then, when they're hatched, Then we start off with what we call their larval stage, or to us it's the tadpole stage. And again, they are very much like fish in the point where they breathe with gills. They have a tail that helps them to propel through the water, and they breathe in the water. They get the oxygen they need from the water. As they continue to grow in both frogs and toads, then they're going to start to get legs. And then we've got some back legs, some front legs, and now we have what's called a froglet. We've gone from the tadpole stage to a froglet. That tail, as Danica explained earlier, begins to be absorbed by the body. In other words, it's kind of using it for energy, kind of like we eat food. So it absorbs until it disappears. And here we're almost completely disappeared, but again, it doesn't fall off. It's used by the body as energy to continue growing until we're either a frog or a toad. Now, on my left, okay, in this container, the very active one is that frog that we caught earlier. Don't worry, when we're done, we'll let him go back outside. In my right hand, this one is a toad. Now here's a funny thing. All toads are frogs, but are all frogs toads? The answer is no, and here's why. Let's talk about the frog first. Remember, we caught this guy as an adult. We caught him down in the water. Adult frogs need to at least be close to the water because see how shiny he is? Can you tell how shiny he is? He has this wet, slimy skin. Now you also notice, and you can see it really good in this clear container, that he has some really long back legs. Those legs are used for jumping. The frogs can jump over 5 times their own size, their own length. So for you and me, what we would do, you've been here at the Nature Center before. If you walk into the building where the bridge is, where you first come into the building, if you stood right there and jumped in one hop, clear over to the moose at the back door by the cave, if you had wet legs that work like a frog, you could do that in one hop. Now, frogs also have teeth. This is the skeleton of a frog, and I don't even know on the video if you're going to be able to see it, but they have teeth in their top jaw. Frogs eat just about anything, but they are meat eaters, not plant eaters. Okay, they eat anything from bugs to worms to, I believe Danica told you, other frogs. And so they need those top teeth in order to chew. Well, I should say as they get ready to swallow too, because I think it's more for holding their prey. Because then when they swallow, they do something totally different. Now toads, there's always an exception to every rule. We said that frogs have wet, slimy skin. Well, look at toad. It's not even smooth, it's not even wet, and it's got those dry bumps on it. There's an exception to every rule. And then if you look behind his eyes, you see those big glands. Those are poison glands. Now, the poison in the frog comes from the slime that's on his body. The poison from the toad comes from those glands behind his eyes. So if something tries to eat it, it's going to secrete that poison, and hopefully whatever's trying to eat it, a fox, a coyote, my dog, makes them, it tastes terrible. And it's like it's burning and they gag. And so what the toad is hoping is that whatever's trying to eat it spits it out. And believe me, it works because I've seen my dog do it. So it works to the point where she doesn't even touch frogs or any kind of frog or toad anymore because of it. Now, neither one of them have claws on their toes, but if you notice, we talked about those legs. If you look at toads' legs, they are short and stubby. Toads do a lot of walking instead of a lot of hopping like our friend the frog. Toads don't have to live in a wet environment because they have that different skin. They can live in dry areas. They could even live in a desert if they needed to because their bodies can handle it. Frogs, however, cannot. They have to be where there's some sort of moisture. Miss Danica, didn't I forget anything?
Nope, I think you got everything.
Both of them are breathing with lungs, because by the time those little tadpoles grow legs and become froglets, they're developing lungs all at the same time. And so by the time they get to this stage, they're breathing just like you and I, through their nostrils, using their lungs. Welcome to the second part of our virtual field trip. The first part was about frogs and toads. The second part is about seeds. Now, let's think about this for a minute. What if your mom came to you and said, hey, let's plant the garden? And you said, great, I'm going to help. So you get everything ready, and then your buddy comes over and says, hey, why don't we go ride a bike? And you say, Mom, and Mom says, okay, go. So you take off, and you come back, and Mom says, no, let's wait a few days. We'll plant it in a few days. A few days come and go, and Mom says, hey, let's plant the garden today. And you say, no, I really was going to do something else with Grandpa. Can we do it in a few more days? Mom says, sure, there's no rush. So all in all, a week passes, and you and Mom go back out to the garden, and you get ready to plant, and lo and behold, there's things already growing. But wait a minute. You went and played, and you went with Grandpa. You guys didn't plant anything. Why are there things growing already? Well, if you thought about the word weed, you would be correct. But wait a minute, you didn't plant those either. How did they get there? Well, seeds have a way of traveling. Now, before we get to that, let's talk about what a seed needs in order to grow in the first place. There are 4 things that a plant needs in order to live. You need to take that seed, you need to plant it in the soil. You need to make sure that you give it lots of water. The sun's going to shine on it, and it needs lots of air. And then once that plant starts growing or starts to germinate, which means to grow, when it starts to grow, the first thing in that seed that's going to start to grow is the root. The root grows down into the soil, and that root is actually very important to that plant. The roots are how that plant gets its food and water. Everything gets absorbed through the roots. So that's one thing. Okay, so it absorbs that food and water. The second thing is roots hold the plant down. It's the anchor to that plant. On a windy day, that's why we don't have trees blowing around everywhere, because they're held down by their roots. The next thing that starts to grow is the shoot, and the shoot grows up, up, up. It reaches for the sunlight, and before you know it, we call it a stem. And again, a stem has very important functions. Remember that food and water that was coming up from the roots? Well, it has to have some place to go. So there are these little tubes inside that stem where the food and water goes up and down. The second thing is the stem gives the plant its shape. Otherwise, everything would just be laying on the ground all the time. So there are different stems to give different plants different shapes. They're also a place where the leaves grow. Now, the leaves are very important to a plant. Not only do they give it its characteristics and sometimes even give it its color, those leaves are important because that's how the plant makes its own food, which is very different from you and me. If we want food, we got to go to the refrigerator and get it. But a plant can make its own food through a process called photosynthesis. That's where they use that water that comes up from the roots. That's where they use the sunlight that's shining down on them. So in the presence of sunlight, air, and water, the plant is able to make its own food through that process called photosynthesis. That happens right there in the leaves. Then at the top of the stem, sometimes you get a flower, or sometimes you may end up with a fruit. And inside that fruit is where you get a seed, and the process can start all over again. Now, our lesson on seeds involves this book. It's called A Seed is Sleepy. Now, I'm not going to read the book for us today. That's something that you could someday go to the library and find. But I really, really love this book because it talks about how the seed lays in that soil. Sometimes it takes a long time for it to germinate or to grow. Sometimes those seeds, after they grow, produce fruits of their own. And sometimes those fruits come in different shapes or forms, kind of like on pine trees. They're a little bit different. There are many sizes of seeds. They go out on their own to find a place to grow. Sometimes that's by the wind. Sometimes it's in the water. They can even be carried away by you, me, or an animal. And then a seed, I like this part, being generous. It talks about that baby that's growing inside that seed, that baby plant. And that mommy plant gives that baby everything it needs in order to grow. We have the seed leaves called cotyledons. Sometimes we have one seed leaf, which is a monocot. Sometimes we have two seed leaves, which is a dicot. There are some seeds that are really old that have even sprouted after years and years and years. It talks, just like I did, about the roots growing, the shoot going up, and how it turns the sunlight, the water, into food for that plant. And then we talk about that seed being awake into those flowers, those plants that we recognize. Now that whole process of finding the soil, the water, air, and a place to grow, you know, that's kind of like a baseball game. And so I'm sure some of you play baseball or softball, and you know that if you go to your game, one team is going to win, one team is going to lose. Okay? It's kind of the same way with seeds. Not all of them are going to be able to grow. They are not all going to find these things, the soil, the right spot with enough space and air and water in order to grow. So let's pretend that I'm a mommy oak tree. And when I grow, I have my baby acorns and they fall off. Now, if they all fall off and end up right here by me, is that a good thing or a bad thing? Well, I say it's a bad thing. And here's why. All those babies are going to have to compete for those things that we just talked about, the sunlight, the soil, the water, and the air, and they're all not going to get that. Also, what if a disease comes in and all the oak trees in the world are right here in this spot and a disease comes in and wipes them out? We're out of oak trees. But if that tree had help, because remember, trees don't have feet. But if that tree had help and those babies were able to spread out over there, over there, over there, and over there, they have a better chance of finding those things in order to grow, the sunlight, soil, water, and air. And once they do grow, if a disease comes in and wipes out all the oak trees right here, we still have them because there's still going to be oak trees over there, and over there, over there, and over there. Now we know that trees are important. Plants in general are important. I like breathing. You like breathing. That is one thing that's important. But another thing is that when these plants get their seeds spread out, that also means that we have, well, they have the opportunity to have a lot of different plants in one location. Now that's important for a couple reasons. One, well, it looks pretty. Okay, let's face it, it looks pretty. I like to look outside and see different things. This time of the year, I've got a tree out there that's blooming that's purple. I've got one that has white flowers. I've got one where the leaves are starting to come out and they appear red. We've got grass and bushes and other flowers. It's pretty. But one important thing is, it's also, there's a lot of different places for different animals to live and to get the things that they need in order to survive. When you have a lot of different things living together in an area, that's called biodiversity. Bio means life. Diversity means a lot of different things. So you put them all together, biodiversity, you have a lot of different living things in one area. That helps for, like I said, got animals living. It also helps when it comes to diseases and things like that that come in and wipe everybody out. You still have those species other places. But those plants need help. They don't have feet. So here's how they're helped. They're helped by, those plants are helped by the wind. The wind takes some of those seeds that are light and fluffy, and they just float away. Just like someone in a parachute. When the wind takes the person in the parachute, it would blow away. Kind of works like the milkweed. You know. I don't want all the stuff to come out, but do you recognize this from the fall? Well, look, you can see right now as everything, how easy that was for those seeds to go away, and that light fluffy stuff works just like a parachute. Or they might work kind of like a helicopter. So here's my, hopefully this will work. Yeah, you probably didn't see it till it hit the ground, but I'll bet you can see this seed. I bet you've seen these seeds before that you call little helicopters. Okay? They spin as they come off the maple tree. We call them a samara. I'll bet you can see this one. Now find one that still has the seed in the bottom. There we go. Looks like a wing. You've got the heavy seed in the end. You've seen them come off trees. Let's try that one more time. There we go. See them spin, the wind takes them, they go away. So we have wind that helps. Water is something else that helps these plants to get their seeds to go away. And they make this their seeds so they're light enough to float like a boat. Think about that. Have you ever thought about how, when you see pictures of, like in the tropics and the islands, and how they all have coconut trees on them? The coconuts float like a boat on the ocean waves from one island to the next. Sometimes seeds get carried away, literally carried away. Have you ever been outside playing in the weeds, and when you come in, you've got these things all stuck to your pants? Well, those seeds have little hooks on them, kind of like Velcro. So when the seed sticks, it sticks to you like Velcro, and then do you stay still? I know I don't. Does a fox stay still? A raccoon, your dog? So as that animal moves, eventually it'll drop off somewhere else than where it began. The next one is eaten or deposited by animals. There are a lot of seeds that are super, super yummy. Birds eat seeds. Have you ever watched at a bird feeder how they don't sit and they actually don't swallow at the bird feeder? They fill their their beak and their what's called a crop. They fill it, and then they go off somewhere else to sit and digest. Okay, well, then they digest, and then birds fly long distances, right? And sometimes that seed goes through their body and gets deposited somewhere else when it's eliminated through the body. Or you get an animal like squirrels who think these are really super yummy. These are walnuts. And then they collect them, and then, thank goodness that they're not really smart, because they take them and they go bury them somewhere else, and then they forget where they are. And lo and behold, they grow. Now think about that. Do you really think that we went out and planted each and every tree that's here at Oakland Mills? Absolutely not. We had a lot of help from the squirrels because they forget where they put their stash. So they eat them or they bury them because they think that they're going to come back later. So wind, water, carried away, eaten or deposited by animals. And then finally, if all else fails, that plant figures out a way to do things themselves. And so if you just looked at my walnut, notice that the walnut is round. So are balls. And so when this falls off and drops to the ground, where's this ball going to go? It's going to roll away, isn't it? Because that's what they do. Others, you know those little Nerf guns that shoot things out? Just shoot them. There are plants that do the exact same thing, where they just shoot out their seeds and hope for the best and hope there's a big wind gust in the meantime. Now, before I start showing you my activity, my pictures, I want to tell you one thing. If you look where a plant lives, that might be a pretty good indication on how that seed travels. For example, where do cattails live? Cattails live by the water. Water is a great way for cattail seeds to travel. Now here's another clue. Sometimes it's more than one way. Because look at this. Look at the cattail and watch the seeds now. Not sure if you could pick that up on the video, but a whole bunch of little things went flying. So not only do cattail seeds travel by water, they're also going to travel by the wind. So keep that in mind. Look where it lives, and it could be more than one. So let's start us off. I have these pictures. And the first one, let's see how well everybody was listening. I have this first picture. It is a picture of coconuts. Now, who remembers how coconuts are going to travel? If you said water, you would be correct. Believe it or not, they're buoyant enough that they can just float from island to island, like that boat I just showed you. How about this one? It's a picture of milkweed. And we just talked about it, and we decided that milkweed seeds travel by, if you said wind, because it's like a parachute, you would be correct. Now here's another one that's a little trickier. If you could see this one, you would see that there are little hooks on this particular seed. Those little hooks are going to stick to things. Your socks. Coyote hair. So this seed is going to travel by being carried away. This picture, you got to listen to the name of this plant in order, I think that'll give you a hint on how this seed travels. It is called a shooting star. And if you're a shooting star, which method do you think how it's going to travel? If it shoots, it's going to shoot by itself, isn't it? So that is definitely one that goes under self. Let's go with acorns. We have wind, water carried away, eaten or deposited by animals or self. Well, they're not exactly round, but I would say if this fell off a tree, it might roll at least a little bit. So that could be it. Self could be a way it could travel. But how about the next one? Think about this. Who did I say earlier that maybe forgets where they bury things or eats them? So if you guessed, eaten or deposited by animals, it could have been either one. I could put it here in the middle. Now we could do that. I've got a whole bunch more pictures, but I want to show you an example on a few ways that seed can travel more than one way. So we got wind, water carried away, eaten or deposited by animals or self. Here's a picture of prairie grass. When the prairie grass is mature, this seed head does something that is called shatters. And prairie grass generally grows in a big area, open area altogether. So how's that seed going to travel? Let's start first with the shattering part. Nobody helps it shatter. It's going to do that on its own. Once it shatters, I promise you, there are a lot of little animals and maybe even birds that want to eat those seeds. And if you say that the wind helped, you would be correct there also, because it's going to take the wind when it shatters to blow those seeds. Now, honestly, I could probably put it by carried away also, because when the deer go through the fields, I'll bet that some of these seeds would stick to their fur as well. So out of our 5, we could have chosen 4 of them. Let's put this one kind of here in the middle. And then the last one, in case you can't see it very well, that's a frog. That frog is in the water. That frog is in the water, and surrounded by the frog is something called duckweed. We saw a lot of that earlier when we were down in the pond. It's called duckweed. Guess what? It's called duckweed for a reason. Because guess what? Guess who eats it? Hopefully you said ducks and not frogs. So this one definitely, this seed, this duckweed, could be eaten. But I told you we find it in the water. Water is another way that this seed, this green seed called duckweed, could travel. And now think about the frog in the middle. What did we learn about frogs? What did we learn about their skin? It's slimy and sticky. If this frog jumps out of this water, I guarantee that some of those little seeds are going to stick to his body, and then when he hops to the next location and jumps in the water, then they'll come off. So in this instance, we could have had water, eaten by animals, or even carried away. It could have been any of those 3. I'll kind of put it right there in the middle. With that being said, that's all I have for you today. Thank you.